Hey, I'm Logan Wolf, a missionary to the state of Utah, and I wanted to show you real quick a simple tool for sharing the gospel with someone. This doesn't originate with us. It's something our network has field tested extensively. It is something that can be contextualized and customized in conversation. You can share it conversationally. I'm going to show you a way to draw it out, and I recommend doing that as you share it. Normally, when I'm going door to door out on the street, or just running errands around town, I'll carry a small stack of 3x5 cards so that I can draw this out as I'm sharing it. And then, of course, I can even leave my contact information, name, phone number, email, whatever is appropriate with the person. For our purposes today, I'm going to draw it out just on a full-size sheet of paper so that you can see it. Again, doesn't originate with us. It's called the Two Kingdoms, and usually I'll get into this or try to make a segue into this by saying something like, can I share with you the story that changed my life? Now, if they say no, there's no need to force a spiritual conversation where there's hardness towards it, where God's maybe not working at that moment. But if they say yes, I'll pull out that note card and I'll jump into it. So I just want to show it to you real quick. I'll begin by saying something like, I've come to realize that there are two kingdoms in this world. And I'll draw them like that. There's the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of God. And so I'll abbreviate them. We see both of these kingdoms around us all the time. And then I'll begin to describe each kingdom. So I say we see the kingdom of darkness and the brokenness in the world. And we'll give some examples. We see that with exploitation. We see that with injustice. We see that with sickness and disease and death and political discord and all that. And we could just go on and on, right? We also see the kingdom of God around us. And so I'll draw a heart here. And then I'll give some examples. We see this in, just the beauty of creation. We see this in the love of maybe family or friends, a new baby. The difference between these two kingdoms is their king. So the king of the kingdom of darkness is Satan. And if I had to describe Satan in a single word, it would be liar. And I think the biggest lie that Satan has told us is that we can be our own king. And that sounds great, right, initially, because if I'm my own king, I'm setting the agenda, I'm calling the shots, I'm the authority, right? It's about me. But if I'm my own king, I have to deal with the brokenness in my life around me, myself. And people deal with that brokenness in all different kinds of ways, right? And so we'll give some examples here. Sometimes people will deal with brokenness with things like sex or alcohol or drugs. So I'm just going to draw an arrow and abbreviate that SAD. Some people will turn to things like money and career and education or titles. I'm just going to draw a little dollar sign here. And then people will even turn to things like religion and church and being a good citizen. And so I'm just going to draw a little church building here. And the truth of the matter is all of those things will work for a little bit. But eventually the high wears off, or you sober up, or the guy or the girl leaves. Eventually, you miss out on the promotion, or you miss out on the raise, or you get it and it didn't get you the prestige or buy the happiness that you thought it would, or you're checking all these boxes, these religious good deeds, and you miss one of those boxes, and the shame and the guilt that you're trying to run from or hide from comes rushing back into your life. And what happens at that point is you basically are snapped right back into this brokenness. You're right where you started. There's a king over here, the kingdom of God as well, and his name is Jesus. And if I had to describe Jesus in a single word, it would be love. And I think the greatest display of that love is the fact that he came down into our brokenness and lived this perfect life that we could never live if we had 1,000,000 lifetimes to live it. And then he goes to the cross and he dies the death that our brokenness, that sin, deserves. And he takes it all on himself. And then 3 days later, he comes out of the grave, triumphant, victorious over that brokenness. And so at that point, the Father actually crowns Jesus not just Lord of the good stuff, but he is actually Lord of everything. He's Lord of the universe. He is the ultimate authority. And so he invites us to come out of this brokenness where we are and come into this kingdom of God to experience the wholeness, the completeness, the forgiveness, the acceptance, the worthiness that he has bought for us with his own blood. The only thing he asks us to do is to take off our crown and to lay it at his feet and to recognize his, to realize I'm not God. I'm not the king. I'm not the authority. Jesus is. And at that point, we can experience that wholeness. So when I share that illustration, I share that story, I will follow it up with a few questions. The obvious immediate question to ask is, does that make sense? Sometimes we're sharing that, we may forget something, leave something out, so there's this big gap in the story. We may be unclear, we may introduce a word, a phrase that they're unfamiliar with. And so this is a question about clarity. The second question is, where do you see yourself in that, right? There's only two kingdoms here, so there's no in the middle. I'm in the kingdom of darkness or I'm in the kingdom of God. And no matter where they place themselves, you can always follow up to get clarity on your part. So if you're talking with someone and you're fairly certain I think this is an unbeliever, but they're talking about being in the kingdom of God, you can ask, well, how do you know that? Or what does that look like in your life? Or when did that happen? And the same even with someone who says they're in the kingdom of brokenness. Like, what does that look like in your life? How are you trying to deal with that brokenness? And then a third and final question is, especially when someone self-identifies as being in that brokenness, is, well, what would keep you from taking that crown off? From going in from the kingdom of darkness, the kingdom of brokenness, into this kingdom of God through Jesus Christ. So I hope that's helpful. Man, we are seeing great fruit with that. God is leading a lot of men and women to Christ across Utah and beyond. And I would love to hear stories where if you were to implement this and try this out, practice this with a friend, and then go out and share it. I'd love to hear how God uses it in your neighborhood, your city, your county, your state, across the country, around the world. Thank you so much. God bless.